Hello, my name is Chris Smith. My presentation is entitled #Dancing is Not a Crime, Dance as Digital Resistance in the Transnational 21st Century. I'm happy to be giving a presentation on these topics today as part of an ongoing investigation into the role of street dance as a revolutionary tactic, particularly when employed by subaltern populations for whom mobility and evasion are important survival strategies. However, I should also probably begin with a disclaimer. I am not the person to be doing this work. I'm not a Muslim, an Arabic speaker, or a woman. I'm a white cisgender male scholar of vernacular music and dance. Yet the work is there to be done, and it is urgent for reasons I'll explain. This is therefore a preliminary investigation and in fact a call to action, specifically a call to action by music scholars such as myself in service of independence and social justice initiatives. I cannot speak for Muslims, Arabic speakers, or women, but I can seek to raise my voice from the Western Ivory Tower on their behalf as an ally and an advocate. And a content warning. There is no graphic violence in my visual materials, but there are some deeply disturbing moments and facts which reveal the degree to which, in the modern world, dancing is, in fact, literally treated as a crime.
In a live video posted to YouTube in 2014, a young woman dressed in black and standing on a stationary car responds to lo-fi pop music by dancing and then unwinding her hijab and fluffing her long hair. That upload eventually registered over 1 million views and precipitated a spate of responses depicting young women dancing in public spaces, and in turn eventually spawning the hashtag "Dancing is not a crime." Yet, across many historical moments, dancing has been a crime. As recently as 2018, the Iranian Instagram star Mehda Hojabri was arrested for posting videos on Instagram of herself dancing in her home. Shortly thereafter, a grainy, low-resolution video depicted a heavily veiled Hojabri expressing contrition for her crime. Such repression continues. Dancing in public can be a tool of implicit or explicit resistance to social controls, to enclosure of public space, to dominant culture's gendered movement expectations. Those employing sound and movement as resistance, whether Washoe dancers at Grant Park during the 1968 Democratic National Convention, or drag queens at Stonewall in 1969, or Pussy Riot in Red Square in 2012, often do so precisely because street performance is portable, mutable, and infinitely viral, capable of transmission via person-to-person physical or visual contact. Multiple revolutionary movements, from the women's movement of the early 1970s to 1980s hip-hop to the 2000s Arab Spring, have begun in search of safe spaces for dancing, while conversely, the repression of public dance has been a locus for authoritarian crackdowns. Drawing upon a larger historiography of public dance as resistance and employing methodologies from semiotics, musicology, kinesics, and political science, this presentation explores #Dancing is not a crime as a potent, present, and immediate vehicle seeking justice and social revolution. The initial inspiration for this investigation was, in fact, my chance encounter with that video of dance by a woman on the roof of a car who eventually doffs her hijab. Uploaded by Lisa Daftari in 2014 and since disappeared and reappeared, and obviously shot with a low-resolution handheld cell phone camera, it struck me, a historian of, among other things, subaltern dance, as profoundly interruptive, intentionally disruptive, and exceptionally powerful. I subsequently discovered that there is a body of similar videos uploaded by dancers from across the Muslim world, in which the hijab, conventionally associated in public contexts with conservative gender values, is occupied by the vocabulary of embodied dance. These performances read as especially powerful in the context of theocratic regimes' public policing by official, paramilitary, or voluntary arbiters of gendered conduct. And thus I have focused for purposes of scope and topic upon material centering hip-hop dance in the context of Iran, though there are many analogous examples elsewhere, many closer to home. I'm seeking what Ravi Saleh and Sophie Richter-DeVoe describe as, quote, thick description of the broader political, cultural, and economic contexts in which cultures of resistance emerge, which in turn necessitates situating the artwork, music, internet, or other forms of creative protest in the global and local material and structural contexts which enable and constrain them. This movement appears to arise from earlier manifestations of hip-hop as a global resistance strategy and of its use as an emblem of personal and social freedom going all the way back to the Clinton administration. That's in fact Ambassador Karen Hughes in that image. Calling it, quote, a genre conceived as outsiders' protest against the system, Cynthia P. Schneider, writing in the Brown Journal of World Affairs in 2006, says, quote, hip-hop resonates with those marginalized from the mainstream. And Schneider describes a 1980s Syrian audience who, quote, became so carried away that even the security guards joined in, pantomiming living in a glass cage as they danced, end quote. Like jazz and rock music, hip-hop was deployed as part of USA international diplomacy and covert subversion precisely because of its semiotic mapping as American and multicultural. We can debate in another context the ethics of both the US government's covert subversion and of the semiotic readings which they imposed upon these genres. But suffice it to say that like rock and roll in the 1960s and reggae in the early 1970s, by the early 1990s, hip-hop was internationally widely mapped as eruptive, disruptive, and subaltern. And as had been the case of jazz and rock and roll, it was so employed as part of State Department international diplomacy. Dance, breaking, popping, and locking, etc., is an integral part of the hip-hop complex, but its appearance as an international performance of resistance, especially by women in heavily gendered theocratic contexts, is a more recent trend, seemingly dating from the early 2010s. This paper then seeks to theorize these guerrilla videos of hijab-wearing women dancing hip-hop in public settings in Iran as resistant noise, as grit intentionally thrown into the gears of authoritarian and centralized social structures. The more public manifestation of this resistance is captured in the body of material, especially widely distributed on social media, with the hashtag dancing is not a crime. However, while that hashtag was significantly more visible in the wake of the arrest and then the tearful repentance of Maida Hojabri, the use of Western secular expressions, and especially of hip-hop sounds and motion, has deeper roots in pan-Muslim resistant movements. In passing, I think it might be worthwhile to distinguish here between what I might perceive as a dispute regarding the definitions of gender in public versus private space. For example, in Hojabri's case, the debate perhaps revolved in part around whether Instagram itself is perceived as a private context, like a family or a private celebration, or a public space like the street, or as an in-between space like the radio or television studio. Hashtag dancing is not a crime, like a good deal of social media-based activism reaching back to Lower Manhattan in 2011, Tahrir Square in 2012, and Taksim Gezi Park in Istanbul in 2014, was precipitated by individuals' intentional or unwitting transgressions of disputed cultural and contextual boundaries. Quote, with the popular uprisings that erupted in several countries across the Middle East and North Africa from 2000 onwards, street protests in the form of ordinary people's creative and challenging artistic expressions could no longer be left unnoticed. From Tahrir Square to Gezi Park, public spaces came to be inhabited by graffiti, music, art, and performances, which engendered and conveyed new affective and political ties, end quote. Likewise, prior to Maida Hijabri's experience, the experience of 6 Iranian Zumba dancers who were publicly excoriated, imprisoned, and sentenced to corporal punishment for a light-hearted video in 2014. It should also be pointed out that this particular 2014 crackdown occurred precisely at a moment of political tension between Islamic hardliners and the more moderate Iranian president Hassan Rouhani, who was seeking re-election. In other words, authoritarian crackdowns are equally performative and equally sensitive to particular historical moments. In contrast, I would argue that the women dancing in public, especially dancing hip-hop, in these guerrilla videos is a different, much riskier proposition. And it's this latter phenomenon, and unfortunately, confirmed by the sad accuracy of my subsequent analysis, which are my current focus of interest and attention. There is no ambiguity about public versus private here. Indeed, it is precisely because the street in the midst of traffic is inarguably a public space that this dancing is inarguably disruptive, eruptive, and subversive. This is then the temporary occupation of public space with movement and sound, with visual and sonic noise. Asaf Bayat, Rodiger Locker, Abdullah Niang, Sunaina Myra, and Jill Oslo, and Osama Kaf, among others, have written extensively about rap in the Muslim world, with perhaps a particular focus on the content of MC's rhymes and personae. But there does not appear to be much scholarship, if any, in English, French, or German, which deals with this subset of female hip-hop dance in public spaces. I may add in passing that I would be very glad to hear of such scholarship that I might well have missed. I should also add that my investigation and my outreach to both scholars and activists is ongoing. In the essay Plebeians of the Arab Spring from October 2015, which is a discussion of street resistance in Egypt and Tunisia, Asaf Bayat suggests that, quote, in a social environment, that is, a collective action of non-collective actors can yield individualized encroachments, within which, for example, quote, the youth of the dispossessed, those who are shunned as dangers to the public, assert their presence in the main streets and squares, end quote. Similarly, in a 2003 essay for Middle East Report, he calls, quote, street politics the modern urban theater of contention par excellence, end quote. Bayat is speaking of vendors, food and tax protesters, and other small, explicitly municipal or political street protests, but his model for Arab world street resistance seems equally applicable to the case of Iranian hijabis dancing hip-hop. Bayat likewise articulates precisely why young people, university students and others, may be a particular target for authoritarian crackdown because, quote, the moment they decide to come out into the street, forces of public morality intervene in order to, quote, keep the protest a local, that is, low-profile event. So there's a particular intersection occurring here in which the importation into theocratic contexts of Western resistance-associated idioms like rapping and breaking meets contemporary social media tools like YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, which can function, as Twitter did on Wall Street in 2011 and in Egypt in 2012, the way the internet itself was originally designed to function, that is, as a decentralized resistance communications channel. On hacking this technology for subaltern political resistance, Paul Willis comments, quote, symbolic creativity uses technological devices and products of the content industry in a way not intended by the creators of these devices and products, and results in a critical reception of the technological realization of these projects, end quote. I'm working here with the idea that dance itself, like other vernacular expressive arts, including contrafacted texts, MCs texts, children's rhyming songs, and the cultural associations of certain sounds and timbres themselves, may all be theorized as intentionally contagious and indeed viral, and that activists' strategies, tactics, and political insights may be illuminated through such an analytical frame. The use of disruptive noise and movement as part of pop-up resistance actions is an existing trope in various conservative societies, especially those which seek to control the visibility and the bodies of minorities, including gays and women. In fact, the performance of gender defiance was and is an existing body of work on social media. Yet, the particular intersection of hip-hop dance, hijab-wearing women, public settings transmitted via social media strikes me as unique and uniquely powerful, an interpretation which would seem to be confirmed in the very fact of various regimes' authoritarian response. This performance by authoritarian hegemony is essential to the state's construction and maintenance of its public self, and cracks in that facade are ferociously policed. Rina Effendi says, quote, for a young person to feel safe in the Islamic Republic of Iran, they must break the law. Holding hands in public is punishable. The sight of a woman smoking, cause for arrest. Being different, whether by sexual orientation, religion, musical taste, or style of dress, is prosecuted, end quote. This is Sarah Afsharian. And again. Sarah Afsharian was arrested along with Sarah Shareta Marari and Nilüfer Motier on October 8th of 2019 and was tried in a court presided over by the head of the 28th branch of Tehran's Islamic Revolutionary Court. Those arrests were followed within the month by additional crackdowns on other dancers. Afsharian, who was likely targeted precisely because of the size of her Instagram following, which stood at 94,000 at the time of her arrest, was sentenced to 2 years and remanded to the Quarchak prison near Tehran, a prison which has been listed by the US government as a site of human rights violations. In the wake of those arrests, similar acts of resistance have expanded and continue to proliferate on social media, both within and beyond Iran's borders. These pop-up actions have in fact expanded to include not only dancing, but also singing, another activity punished and prohibited by women in social public spaces as well. Note the date. As of this writing, and to the extent that such things are knowable from a geographic and experiential distance, Sarah Afsharian and a number of other dancing activists remain in limbo. There are lessons here. Thank you very much.